Study Section 6. Animal Learning 2. Classical and Instrumental Conditioning. We commenced exploration of learning in the previous study section. Specifically, we focused on habituation. We will go further on our study by examining another form of learning described as classical conditioning. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this section, you should be able to distinguish classical conditioning from instrumental conditioning. Classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is the learning of emotional and reflexive responses through the formation of mental associations between stimuli. For example, a dog can learn fear of a veterinary clinic in the following way. If the dog has never before been in the clinic, the stimuli of the clinic, in bracket, such as a look, smell, and sound, should be neutral or meaningless. However, after the dog is restrained by technicians and injected with a needle, it may associate the look, smell, and sound of the vet clinic with physical restraint and the pain of the injection, so that the next time it is taken in for a procedure, the clinic stimuli are no longer natural because they now acquire the power of eliciting fear in the dog. In classical conditioning, in bracket, also called Pavlovian conditioning, animals learn a relationship between two events or stimuli. One of these stimuli is a neutral or unimportant stimulus that as the animal would normally pay a little attention to. This stimulus is called the conditioned stimulus or CS because it can generate strong behavior only as a result of conditioning. The other stimulus is a biological important stimulus that an animal naturally pays a lot of attention to, e.g. food. This stimulus is called the unconditioned stimulus or US because it can generate strong behavioral responses without any conditioning. The structure of classical conditioning. Before conditioning, stimulus, CS in bracket bell, US in bracket food. Response, hair twitched, interest, head turn, UR in bracket salivation. After conditioning, stimulus, CS in bracket bell, US in bracket food. Response, CR in bracket salivation. In the classical example, the Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov taught dogs to salivate in response to the ringing of a bell. Pavlov did this by repeatedly pairing a bell, CS, and some food, US, presenting them close together in time. A naive dog normally responds to the ringing of a small bird by merely twitching its ears or looking towards the noise. However, a piece of food can cause the dog to show a great deal of strong behavior like excitement, salivation, digging and pawing, chewing and eating. This very strong behavior caused by exposure to a US is called the unconditioned response or UR. Through classical conditioning, the CS and the US become associated in the dog's mind, so that behavior, in bracket unconditioned response or UR, that is naturally triggered by the US, e.g. salivation, excitement, comes to be triggered to some degree by the CS also. When a CS develops the ability to trigger behavior that is normally caused by a US, this learned response is called the conditioned response or CR. In Pavlov's experiments, the dog eventually learned that the bear predicted food and began to salivate in response to the bell. CR only. Not everything an animal learns through classical conditioning is desirable. For instance, if a harsh correction is given the first time a chain choke collar is placed on a walking dog, it will probably show inhibition and anxiety the next time a chain collar is placed on his neck. This type of undesirable classically conditioned responses can be weakened or even abolished by presenting the CS repeatedly without pairing it with the US, causing the CR to gradually decrease in strength. This process of extinction is just like habituation, except that in habituation, an unlearned response is gradually abolished, whereas in extinction, a learned response is gradually abolished. For example, suppose a dog has been trained to become aggressive when it hears gunfire, in bracket by association of the sound of gunshot with the opportunity to bite. But in its new job as a detention dog, this response is undesirable. Here, a previously trained response has become a behavior problem. The remedy is not simple, but a first step is to produce some extinction of the aggressive response by putting the dog in a neutral situation and firing a gun repeatedly until the animal's arousal response to the gun decreases. It is important to state that extinguishing a learned behavior does not mean that it has been unlearned or wiped out, even though the behavior may no longer be expressed. Learning can become permanent changes in the brain that are not reversed by extinction. Thus, a behavior thought to be extinct may suddenly reappear, especially with a change in the context, in bracket environment of training. Instrumental conditioning. Instrumental conditioning is another method by which animals learn. It is a learning process through which an animal's behavior is changed by the consequences or results of behavior. For example, if a puppy approaches and sniffs a cat, and the cat spits and scratches the puppy's nose, the puppy is less likely to approach the next cat it sees. The behavior, in brackets, approaching a cat, has been modified by its consequence, a painful experience. This is an example of punishment, a consequence which is likely to reduce approach behavior of the dog to cats in the future. A contrasting example goes as follows. If a dog chews at the door of his wooden crate house and the crate bursts open, then the dog is more likely to chew at the crate in the future. The behavior, crate chewing, has been modified by its consequence, freedom. This is an example of reward, also called reinforcement. In both examples of instrumental learning above, an association is formed between a behavior and a stimulus. And this is a central distinction between instrumental conditioning and classical conditioning. Classical conditioning involves formation of an association between two stimuli. Instrumental conditioning procedures emphasize formation of a response-stimulus association. For example, between the act of sitting and some pleasant stimulus, like a piece of food. End of study section 6. Thanks for listening.